All right, this is going to be chapter reading of part two of the book Arabs at War in Afghanistan. And the chapter is Azzam, Sayyaf, and bin Laden establish Maktab Al Khidamat. And this is part two because it was 8 pages, I believe. And I'm going to make myself disappear so we can read it together. Leah Farrall. How about Azzam's motivations? I thought his support for establishing Maktab Al Khidamat centered on his desire to build unity between the various Afghan groups. And he believed the Arabs could do this if they can build the infrastructure and support necessary for the jihad. Is this correct? I also read Azzam thought the lack of Afghan ulema to support the jihad and educate the people and the mujahideen was a problem because so many had been martyred, and he wanted to help in this area. At least that was according to the account of his widow, Mustafa Hamid. Thing about the ulema of Afghanistan had their own way of teaching and learning. They had their own schools. This was the special teaching of Islam, away from the governments and institutions. The purpose of Maktab al-Khidamat in the education area was to inject the teachings of Ikhwan Muslimin into a new generation of Afghans and to inject the teachings of the Salafis. By the way, currently, that's what's happening right now under the Taliban with the new madrasas that are being built, over 60, a ridiculous number. And now just imagine with Al-Qaeda instituted in government that the teachings of the Salafi, along with traditions of Hanafi Islam, which is what the Taliban adhere to, which is far different than the Salafist mindset, which predates it, no less. This caused a large divide in Afghanistan, and they are continuing to suffer the consequences of this. Leah Farrall. Was the Ikhwan Muslimin element really so influential? Mustafa Hamid. Yes. Azzam was Ikhwan. Sayyaf, the leader of Ikhwan in Afghanistan, and Maktab al-Khidamat was essentially an Ikhwan project. Abu Abdallah, who by the way is Osama bin Laden, was initially Ikhwan. He turned to Wahhabi. What of Sayyaf's motivations then? I thought he was seeking more religious support from Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, as well as higher levels of aid. But from what you've told me about the events leading up to Maktab al-Khidamat's creation, it seems Sayyaf's support was at least in part to ensure he would capture a significant amount of funding and exercise influence over the direction of the organization. Mustafa Hamid. Sayyaf realized that since two of the most powerful Arabs wanted to start this organization, it would be coming anyways. And so, I'll make myself disappear again. And so, it wanted to be near him. He agreed to support it after his name, his party, and his leadership, in part because he was hoping most of the money would come to him. He was not happy about it, but having it near was the best option for him. Mustafa Leah Farrall. I would like to divert a little here and ask you a question about the view of Sayyaf. You have made quite of negative comments about Sayyaf. I wanted to ask you, frankly, whether your views on Sayyaf are, by the way, Rasul Abdul Sayyaf, are influenced by the fact that he is now part of the Afghan government, while you favor the Taliban. Some readers will be wondering whether this has become influence on your accounts. Mustafa Hamid. When we talk about jihad, I will tell you about what Abu Hafs said to me about his experiences with Sayyaf. You will see that it is the same as Basil Muhammad's account of what Abu Hafs told him. And that was written before the Taliban came to power. So there were these problems with Sayyaf and with the others. In fact, I have said most of the Afghan yard was corrupt. And this is why Marwawi Mansour put into place his program of long-term reform, which was the beginning of the Taliban. Leah Farrall. Okay, that should make for an interesting discussion. Mustafa Hamid, yes. Maktab al-Khidamat was founded in October 1984 by Abdullah Azzam with support from Abdul Rasul Sayyaf and funding from Osama bin Laden. Also, at the same time, Another figure that was influential was Abdullah Anas, an Algerian. Azzam was the Amir of Maktab Al Khidamat, but he did not reside in Peshawar permanently because at that time he was still teaching in Islamabad. A deputy emir had day-to-day control of the organization. Bin Laden was not yet permanently based in the region, and although as founding financier, he had a place on Maktab Al Khidamat's Shura Council and Finance Committee. By the way, the structure of the Maktab Al Khidamat slowly became the structure of Al Qaeda. They had a media committee, a widows committee, a military committee, a Shura Council, which is a religious council. And this structure, which was created by Abdullah Azzam, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri later on, Abdullah Anas, Osama bin Laden. And it wasn't until later that the Egyptian Takfiris, led by Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri and Sayyid Imam al-Sharif, Dr. Fadl, that Abdullah Azzam was being pushed out. And these individuals with Osama bin Laden knew that bin Laden had money and cared to use it to defeat the near enemy approach, which was to destroy the local Arab governments and replace them with a Islamic government under the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah and Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab. Takfiri, Salafist mindset, where they could judge other Muslims and judge them as deemed as munafiq, fake Muslim. That's why they hate the Shia more than they hate the Jew or the atheist. Maktab Al Khidamat was initially a small organization, beginning with around a dozen or so members. It was also an organization of leaders. At one time, during its early period, when membership numbers reached 30, half were designated as committee heads. With a small membership, most early activities focused on media, fundraising, and religious education in support of the jihad and for the Afghan population. As it grew, Maktab Al Khidamat later also supported health and education initiatives in partnership with charities to assist Pakistan's Afghan refugee population. Abdullah Azzam wanted for a unified ulema, in that the religious teaching of religious jihad or defensive jihad, not offensive jihad, but defensive jihad, that any enemy of any ideology, whether it be communism, democracy, polytheism, atheism, socialism, if they are to be invaders of Islamic governments, then we are as rights to defend ourselves by calling the Muslim ulema around the world, Muslim Ummah, the group. Not one specific branch, but the Muslim mindset to defend against the invader enemies. By 1985, Maktab Al Khidamat had begun to expand and swelled rapidly after the 1987 Jaji battles, as it sought to facilitate an influx of foreign volunteers who arrived seeking to join the jihad. Even after Maktab Al Khidamat reached its peak, very few Arab Afghans associated with the organization had a military role or operated inside Afghanistan, which most working on logistics and support in Peshawar. By then, Maktab Al Khidamat had serious administrative problems, was fraught with allegations of corruption within its ranks. And it was another reason why Abdullah Azzam was pushed out. How widespread was the corruption problem with Maktab Al Khidamat, as says Leah Farrall? Or was it a case of mismanagement? Mustafa Hamid. There was some misbehavior with the money. I think some of the people working there misused money. It was not common for all of them. It was a small group who came from the same country in the same area. Abu Abdallah was very angry. In bin Laden's eyes, Maktab Al Khidamat mismanagement prevented the jihad from better support inside Afghanistan, an issue on which he had become more focused after his earlier visits to the Jajah front. He believed narrowing the organization's focus and trying to improve the way it was managed would help to ensure military support and activities were prioritized and corruption eliminated. Azzam supported broadening Maktab Al Khidamat's activities because he believed this would help foster unity among Afghan groups, the lack of which was harming the jihad, because Afghans are notoriously sectarian. They are petty when it comes to domestic indifferences. Money, power, fame still goes on today, but not as much. Maktab al-Khidamat's activities outside the military realm continued despite bin Laden's disapproval, largely because by then Azzam had alternate sources of funding. And this was another reason why bin Laden wasn't captured in 2001, December of 2001, when the CIA and the special forces and the Afghan warlords had him surrounded, had him trapped between the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, was that the U.S. Special Forces knew that Afghans relied on money. So their loyalties were persuaded by money. And they were not very aggressive in trying to capture bin Laden and al-Qaeda. They would help U.S. Special Forces and the CIA Special Activities Division to try and advance on bin Laden, but they wouldn't go so far as to shoot to kill any al-Qaeda or Taliban. And it was reported near the end that the Afghan warlords had switched sides, some of them. And the State Department actually essentially told the leader of the Jawbreaker operation, Gary Bernstein, that he's to rely on the Afghans. And Bernstein knew that they couldn't be relied on. So he tried to get special forces to an additional 200 troops from U.S. Special Forces, and the SOCOM General Myers said no. And that's only because they were already sending troops to Iraq to fight the war. This would prove important when, in 1986, the two main differences over the administration of Maktab al-Khidamat and how to support the Afghans were resulted in bin Laden withdrawing of funding. These differences came to a head when bin Laden moved to base himself in Peshawar to more closely supervise activities around the same time Azzam relocated from Islamabad for the same purpose. Where their conflict was ostensibly over administrative issues within Maktab al-Khidamat, it was based on their deeply divergent beliefs about the purpose and function of the organization and the Arab-Afghan jihad in general. This became apparent in their different opinions on where military aid and funding should be directed, how Arab training should be coordinated, and how the military council of Maktab al-Khidamat should be administered. Their difference of opinion eventually resulted in bin Laden focusing on establishing his own independent group. Much of his desire to do so because of the earlier failed efforts at training the Arabs and the conditions he witnessed on a visit to the front lines at Jaj. And that led to the creation of al-Masri training camp, which became the base, which later translated to al-Qaeda. Members of the Maktab al-Khidamat through the al-Masri training camp to the organization al-Qaeda, which originally wasn't, like I said in previous videos, it wasn't originally a terrorist organization. It later became one, but initially it was basically just to train Afghans in guerrilla-themed operations. That's what the Arab training camp al-Masri was there for. The Maktab al-Khidamat initially changed under Abdullah Azzam's leadership. He wanted to teach Afghans and Afghan Arabs on self-resilience and to be trained in the proper mindset of Islamic theology under his brand. Bin Laden, under the influence of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad members like Abu Hafs al-Masri and Dr. Ahmed al-Swahiri, Sayyid Imam al-Sharif, and Mahmoud Salim, and Abu Ubaida al-Banshiri, these guys wanted to basically use the offices of Maktab al-Khidamat to basically try and help overthrow Arab governments to create a caliphate of sorts. But they couldn't do that because it's about time. And they didn't have the necessary members to fight against these Arab government armies, like in Libya or Syria, much less Iran, right? Or even in Jordan or Lebanon. But later on, Here we are in 2025, folks, and Syria and Afghanistan are fully under the government of a terrorist. And Al Qaeda is bigger than ever before. And not just in Afghanistan, Southeast Asia, but also in North Africa and the Middle East. All right, guys, listen, thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of the chapter reading of Arabs at War. And I'll see you in the next video, everybody. Take care.